The revolver shook in her bloodied hands. Dawn had barely broken over Montana territory when Coulter Hayes found her, a stranger crouched behind his barn, more wolf than woman, ready to kill or die. She had a name the whole territory wanted buried. Mara Vale, accused thief, hunted fugitive, the girl they'd destroyed without trial. But when their eyes met across that frozen morning, something shifted. He should have turned her in. Instead, he made the choice that would reshape both their lives forever. This is the story of two broken souls who found each other in the last lawless corner of America, where trust was currency and love was rebellion. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The first thing Coulter Hayes noticed that October morning wasn't the figure itself. It was the crows. They'd gone silent too fast, their raucous complaints over breakfast scraps cutting off mid-squawk like someone had wrung their necks. He'd been walking from the main house toward the barn, coffee mug steaming in the pre-dawn cold, when the unnatural quiet made the hairs on his neck stand up. 42 years old, widowed for 6, Coulter had learned to read the land the way other men read newspapers. Silence meant something had disturbed the natural order. Could be a cougar, could be worse. He set the mug down on a fence post without a sound, his hand moving automatically to the Colt .45 he kept on his hip. The barn loomed ahead, dark wood weathered gray by Montana winters, its shadow stretching long in the thin morning light. Nothing moved, but something was there. He could feel it the way you feel eyes on you in a crowded room. Coulter circled wide, boots crunching frost-brittle grass, approaching the barn's north side from an angle that kept the rising sun at his back. Smart move if whatever was out here had a gun. They'd be squinting right into the glare. That's when he saw her. She was pressed against the barn's back wall, tucked into the narrow space between the structure and a pile of firewood he'd stacked last week. At first glance, she looked like she'd crawled out of a grave. Her dress, once probably blue, now the color of road dust, hung in tatters around her legs, dark hair matted with burrs and what might have been dried blood. Face so pale it was nearly gray, except for the bruises. Those were purple-black and angry, spreading across her left cheekbone like spilled ink. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They weren't the eyes of a corpse or a victim too far gone to fight. They were the eyes of a cornered animal, wild, desperate, and fully prepared to take him down with her if that's what survival required. Her right hand gripped a revolver, and though the barrel wavered slightly, it was pointed directly at his chest. "Don't!" Her voice came out raw, like she'd been screaming or hadn't spoken in days. "Don't come closer." Coulter froze, hands rising slowly away from his sides. The Colt stayed in its holster. "Easy now." "I said don't move." "I'm not moving." He kept his voice level, the tone he'd use with a spooked horse. "That's my barn you're leaning on, so I figure I've got a right to know who's pointing iron at me on my own property." Her jaw clenched. Up close he could see she was young, mid-20s maybe, though hard living had a way of aging people out here. Her hands trembled badly enough that he wondered if she'd ever actually fired a gun before. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, though the statement lost some conviction when her voice cracked halfway through. "Then maybe point that somewhere else. Maybe you should go back inside and pretend you never saw me." Coulter studied her. Beyond the fear and exhaustion, there was something else in her face, a kind of stubborn defiance that hadn't been beaten out of her yet. "Can't do that." "Why not?" "Because you're on my land, and because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because you look like you're about 2 minutes from collapsing, and I'd rather not have a body behind my barn come spring thaw." Something flickered in her expression. Not trust, but maybe the faintest recognition that he wasn't reaching for his gun. "Who are you?" Coulter asked. She hesitated so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Mara Vale." The name meant nothing to him, but clearly she expected it to. She watched his face like a card player looking for tells, waiting for recognition, for anger, for whatever reaction men usually had when they heard that name. "Should I know you?" That caught her off guard. You don't know who I am." "Can't say I do. I don't get to town much." "What town is this near?" "Fort Benton's about 15 miles east. Virginia City's further south. This is just ranch country out here." "My ranch." He lowered his hands slightly. Now you want to tell me why you're hiding behind my barn pointing a gun at me, Miss Vale. Her face crumpled for just a second, a crack in the armor, before she forced it back into hardness. They're looking for me. Who's they? Everyone. The word came out bitter. The sheriff. The ranchers. Half of Fort Benton. Maybe all of it by now. What'd you do? I didn't do anything. The outburst was sharp enough to make the gun shake worse. I didn't. She stopped, sucking in a breath. They said I stole from the Kinsley Ranch. They said a lot of things that weren't true. Coulter had been in Montana territory long enough to know how accusations worked out here. The law was thin as paper this far from civilization, and most folks made their own justice. If a town decided you were guilty, the truth didn't much matter. Did you steal from them? No. Then why do they think you did? Her laugh was ugly. Because Thomas Kinsley said so. And when the foreman's son points a finger, people believe him. What happened to him? He disappeared. 3 days after She stopped herself. 3 days after he cornered me in the stable and I told him no. Next morning he's gone, and suddenly his father's claiming I stole his watch and his horse and probably murdered him too. Coulter's expression didn't change, but something cold settled in his gut. He'd heard stories like this before. They never ended well for the woman. You kill him? No, I never touched him. I left that night because I knew what was coming. I knew they'd... Her voice broke. I've been running for 2 weeks, sleeping in ditches, eating whatever I could steal from gardens. I needed somewhere to rest. I saw your barn and I thought... She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Coulter looked at her. Really looked. The desperation carved into every line of her body, the way she held herself upright through what had to be pure exhaustion and adrenaline. She'd run 15 miles through wilderness most men wouldn't cross without a horse and supplies. She'd survived 2 weeks as a fugitive in October, when the nights were already dropping below freezing. That took something most people didn't have. When's the last time you ate? The question seemed to surprise her. What? Food. When? Yesterday. Maybe. Some potatoes from a farm. Raw? She nodded. Coulter sighed through his nose, the sound of a man making a decision he knew was probably stupid. All right. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to put that gun down, slowly, and I'm going to take you inside and feed you. Then we'll figure out what comes next. I can't. You can barely stand. Look at yourself. He kept his voice firm but not unkind. You're running on empty, Miss Vale. Another day out here and you won't be running at all. You'll just be dead. Why would you help me? Suspicion sharpened her words. You don't know me. For all you know, everything they said is true. Maybe, but I don't think it is. Why not? Because killers don't usually shake like leaves when they point guns at people. And thieves don't run for 2 weeks on principle. They run until they can sell what they stole. He lowered his hands completely. I think you're exactly what you look like. Scared, desperate, and telling the truth. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. That's the first time in 2 weeks anyone said that. Then I'd say your luck's changing. Slowly, painfully slowly, Mara lowered the revolver. Her hands were shaking so badly, she nearly dropped it. Coulter stepped forward and gently took the weapon from her grip. It wasn't even loaded. The cylinder was empty. She saw him check it and let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. I didn't know how to load it. I found it in a creek bed 3 days ago. I just thought, if someone saw it, they'd keep their distance, Coulter finished. He tucked the revolver into his belt. Smart thinking, desperate, but smart. He offered his hand. She stared at it like it might be a trap. Then, moving like every muscle hurt, she reached out and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs gave out immediately. Coulter caught her before she hit the ground, one arm around her waist, steadying her weight. She was lighter than she should be, all bone and grit, nothing soft left. Easy. I've got you. I can walk. But her body contradicted the claim, trembling violently against him. Sure you can. Humor me anyway. Without asking permission, he shifted his grip and scooped her up. She was too exhausted to protest beyond a weak sound of objection. He carried her around the barn toward the house, a simple 2-story structure he'd built with his own hands 12 years ago. The morning sun was climbing higher now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Smoke curled from the chimney. He'd stoked the fire before coming outside. Mara's head lolled against his shoulder. "If you're lying, if this is a trap, then you'll kill me with your empty gun," Coulter said dryly. Despite everything, she almost smiled. He kicked the front door open and carried her inside. The main room was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies. Everything a man needed and nothing he didn't. He set her down in the chair closest to the fire. She curled into herself immediately, hands stretched toward the heat like a prayer. Coulter moved to the kitchen area and pulled out bread, dried venison, and cheese. Simple food, but more than she'd seen in weeks. He poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and brought it to her first. "Slow sips. Your stomach's probably empty enough to hurt if you gulp it." She took the cup with both hands and drank like a woman dying of thirst, which he supposed she might have been. When she finally lowered it, gasping, there were clean tracks through the dirt on her face where tears had fallen. "Thank you," she whispered. Coulter just nodded and went back to preparing food. He sliced the bread thick, laid out the venison and cheese, brought it all to the table. "Eat." She didn't need to be told twice. The first bite seemed to break something in her. She tore into the food with the single-minded focus of starvation, barely pausing to breathe. He let her eat in peace, settling into the opposite chair with his own coffee. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, she slowed down. The desperate edge of hunger blunted. She looked up at him with something like shame. "I'm sorry, Nothing to apologize for. I ate like an animal." "You ate like someone who needed to." He leaned back in his chair. "Now, you want to tell me the whole story?" Mara wrapped her arms around herself. The fire cast shadows across her face, making the bruises look even darker. "What do you want to know?" "Start with Fort Benton. What were you doing there?" "Working. I was a maid at the boarding house. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. I've been on my own since I was 16. My parents died of fever back in Ohio. I came west because—" She shrugged. "Because there was nothing left back there. I thought maybe out here I could start over." "How'd you end up at the Kinsley Ranch?" Her face hardened. "Mrs. Kinsley needed help with the house. The foreman's wife was sick, so they were short-handed. I took extra work when I could. Laundry, cooking, cleaning the stables. That's where I met Thomas." "The foreman's son?" "Yes." The word was clipped. He acted friendly at first, helpful. Then it changed. He started watching me, following me when I worked, saying things that made my skin crawl." She paused. "The night it happened, I was alone in the stable finishing up. He came in drunk. Started talking about how pretty I was, how lonely he was, how we could have a nice time together if I was smart about it." Coulter's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. "I told him no. Told him to leave me alone. He didn't like that." Her voice had gone flat, emotionless. "He grabbed me, tore my dress. I hit him with a shovel. Not hard enough to kill him, just enough to get away. He went down and I ran. Left Fort Benton that night with nothing but the clothes on my back. And the next morning he was gone. Vanished. They found his horse wandering loose near the river. No sign of him. And suddenly everyone remembered seeing me with him. Everyone remembered how strange I'd been, how secretive. His father went to the sheriff and said I'd stolen his watch and run off. By noon there was a search party." "Did they find you?" "Almost. I hid in a mine shaft for 2 days while they combed the hills. After they passed, I started moving at night, stealing what I had to, trying to get far enough away that the name Mara Vale wouldn't mean anything anymore." She met his eyes. "Then I found your barn." Coulter absorbed the story, turning it over in his mind. It had the ring of truth, ugly, unfair truth. "You think Thomas Kinsley's dead?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe he ran off himself and blamed me to cover it. Or maybe his father knows exactly where he is and just wanted someone to punish." Her hands clenched into fists. "It doesn't matter. They've already decided I'm guilty." "It matters if you're going to clear your name." She laughed bitterly. "Clear my name? How? I'm a woman with no money, no family, no proof. They're ranchers with land and power and friends. Who's going to believe me?" "You'd be surprised." "Would I?" She stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. You seem like a decent man, Mr. Hayes. I appreciate the food and the fire, but you don't owe me anything. I'll rest a few hours and then I'll be gone. You can forget you ever saw me. And go where? West. California, maybe. Somewhere far enough that nobody knows my name. You'll die before you make it out of the territory. She turned on him. Maybe, but at least I'll die free instead of hanging from a rope in Fort Benton. Nobody's hanging you. You don't know that. You're right, I don't. Coulter stood, closing the distance between them. But I know this land. I know winter's coming early this year. I can smell it in the air. You've got maybe 2 weeks before the first real snow hits. You think you're going to walk to California in 2 weeks with no horse, no supplies, no weapon that actually works? I'll find a way. Or you'll freeze to death in a ditch and nobody will even know to bury you. His voice was harsh, but not cruel. Is that really what you want? What I want, Mara said quietly, is to not be hunted anymore. What I want is to sleep without wondering if I'll wake up to a noose. What I want is for any of this to be fair. Her eyes glistened. But we don't get what we want out here, do we? Coulter was silent for a long moment. Then, no, we don't. But sometimes we get what we need. What does that mean? He walked back to the table, poured himself more coffee, bought himself time to think through what he was about to offer. His late wife Sarah would have said he was being an idiot. Then again, Sarah would have already had the girl fed, bathed, and sleeping in the guest room. The thought made his chest ache. It means, he said finally, that you can stay here. Mara stared. What? Stay. Work the ranch. Winter's coming, and I could use help. Can't pay you much, but you'll have food, shelter, and nobody in Fort Benton's going to look for you this far out. Come spring, if you still want to run, I'll give you supplies and a horse, and you can go. Why would you do that? Because I've got more space than I need, and you've got nowhere to go. He shrugged. Seems practical. You don't know me. I could rob you. I could... Could you? He gestured at her trembling hands. You can barely stand. You're going to overpower me and steal my livestock? I could wait until you're asleep. Then I'll sleep light. He met her eyes. Miss Vale, I'm making you an offer. You can take it or leave it. But if you leave, you're going to die out there. We both know it. She looked at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. There has to be a catch. There is. Her face shuddered. There it is. If you stay, you learn to fight. That stopped her. What? The frontier doesn't care if you're innocent or guilty. It only cares if you're strong enough to survive it. Right now, you're not. He leaned against the table. You stay here. You learn to shoot. Really shoot. Not just wave an empty gun around. You learn to ride, to hunt, to defend yourself. When spring comes, you'll be able to actually make it to California. Or wherever you want to go. Mara's throat worked. And that's it? I work and you teach me? That's it. You're not going to... Oh, she couldn't finish the sentence. Understanding hit him. No, you'll have your own room. Lock on the door if you want one. I'm offering you work, not... He shook his head. Not that. The relief in her face was painful to see. She sank back into the chair, shoulders collapsing inward. I don't understand why you're doing this. Coulter looked into the fire. My wife died 6 years ago. Fever took her in the space of 3 days. I've been alone here since, and I've learned that being alone out here, it makes you hard, makes you forget there are people in the world worth helping. He glanced at her. Maybe I'm tired of being that hard. Silence stretched between them. Outside, the crows had started up again, their harsh calls filtering through the morning air. Finally, Mara spoke. If I stay, I pull my weight. I'm not a charity case. Wasn't planning on it. And if anyone comes looking, then we deal with it then. She studied him, searching for the lie, the trap, the betrayal she'd learned to expect. But Coulter's face was open, honest, carved by grief and hard work into something simple and true. All right, she whispered. I'll stay. For the winter. He nodded. Then welcome to the Hayes Ranch, Miss Vale. Mara, just Mara. Mara. He stood. There's a room upstairs, second door on the left. It's dusty, but the bed's good. Why don't you get some sleep? We can talk about work tomorrow. She rose unsteadily. Thank you, I mean it. Don't thank me yet. Winter work is brutal out here. Despite everything, she smiled, small but real. I think I can handle brutal. Coulter watched her climb the stairs, each step slow and painful. When she disappeared into the room and closed the door, he let out a long breath. What the hell had he just done? He'd taken in a fugitive, a woman accused of theft and possibly murder, a stranger with nothing but a story and desperation to her name. If the law came looking, he'd be harboring a criminal. If she was lying, he'd be the fool who believed her. But when he replayed the look in her eyes, that wild, cornered, refusing to break look, he knew he'd make the same choice again. He drained his coffee, set the cup down, and headed back outside. The ranch didn't care about his crisis of conscience. The animals needed feeding, and the fences needed checking, and life went on whether you were ready for it or not. That was the one constant out here. The land didn't give you time to second guess. 3 days passed. Mara slept for most of the first day, waking only to eat the stew Coulter left outside her door. The second day she came downstairs at dawn, pale but steady, and asked what needed doing. He set her to work mucking out the horse stalls, hard, dirty work that would have broken someone softer. She didn't complain once. By the third day, color had started returning to her face. The bruises were fading to yellow-green, and she'd washed the dirt from her hair in the creek. She still moved like someone expecting a blow, but the trembling had stopped. That morning, Coulter found her in the barn before sunrise, already halfway through the feeding. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Slept enough. She dumped grain into a trough. Figured I should start earning my keep. He grunted approval and grabbed a pitchfork. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that forms between people who understand the value of quiet. When the chores were done, Coulter pulled the unloaded revolver from his belt. Come on, time for your first lesson. Mara followed him outside to a clearing behind the barn. He'd set up a row of old bottles on a fence rail. You ever fire a gun before? He asked. No, figured. He showed her how to load the cylinder, how to hold the weapon steady, how to aim with both eyes open. The gun's going to kick. Don't fight it. Let it happen and bring it back on target. Seems simple enough. Shooting's simple. Hitting what you aim at's the hard part. He stepped back. All right, that bottle on the left. Show me what you've got. Mara raised the gun, sighted down the barrel, and fired. The shot went wide by 3 feet. Again. She fired 5 more times. One shot hit the fence post. The rest disappeared into the wilderness. I'm terrible at this, she muttered. You're learning. Big difference. He moved behind her, adjusting her stance. Feet wider, shoulders squared. Don't hold your breath. Let it out slow while you squeeze the trigger. They spent 2 hours out there. By the end, she'd managed to clip 1 bottle, sending it spinning off the rail. The grin that split her face was worth the wasted ammunition. I did it! You did. He reloaded the revolver. Now do it 9 more times and we'll call it progress. The grin faded. 9? Welcome to the frontier, Mara. Out here, almost doesn't count. The days fell into rhythm. Mornings meant chores, feeding animals, hauling water, repairing whatever the land had broken overnight. Afternoons were lessons, shooting, riding, basic tracking. Evenings they'd sit by the fire, eating whatever Coulter cooked, talking about nothing and everything. She learned he'd come to Montana from Missouri after the war. Learned he'd built this ranch from raw land and stubbornness. Learned that Sarah had been a school teacher, that she'd loved books and terrible jokes and the sound of rain on the roof. He learned Mara had taught herself to read from newspapers. Learned she'd once wanted to be a nurse but never had the money for training. Learned she had a scar on her left hand from a kitchen accident when she was 12. They didn't talk about Fort Benton, didn't talk about Thomas Kinsley, or the search parties, or what would happen if someone found her. It was easier to pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. 2 weeks into her stay, the first snow came. Mara woke to find the world transformed, white and silent, beautiful and deadly. She stood at the window, breath fogging the glass, watching Coulter trudge through knee-deep drifts toward the barn. By the time she got downstairs and dressed, he'd already started the morning work. Storm's going to get worse, he said when she joined him. Need to bring the cattle in closer to the barn. Can you handle the north pasture? Yes. Take the roan mare. She's steady in snow. Mara saddled the horse, still clumsy at it, but getting better, and rode out into the white silence. The cold bit through her coat, but she'd learned to ignore discomfort. Discomfort was just the price of survival. She found the cattle huddled together, their breath steaming. Slowly, patiently, she drove them toward the barn, the way Coulter had taught her. It took an hour, but she got them all in. When she returned to the house, he had coffee waiting. "Good work," he said simply. Those two words warmed her more than the fire. That night, the storm hit in earnest. Wind screamed around the house, rattling shutters, driving snow horizontal. Mara sat by the fire with a book Coulter had lent her, but she couldn't focus on the words. "You all right?" he asked from his chair. "Just thinking." About? About how strange this is. A month ago, I was running for my life. Now I'm sitting in a warm house reading a book while a blizzard rages outside. She looked at him. "It doesn't feel real." "It's real." "Why are you really doing this?" The question came out before she could stop it. "And don't say you needed help. You managed fine before I showed up." Coulter was quiet for a long time. Then, "When Sarah died, I stopped seeing the point of things. The ranch kept running because that's what you do. You keep going. But I wasn't living. I was just existing." He stared into the fire. "You showing up, it reminded me that there's more to life than just surviving it." Mara's throat tightened. "I'm sorry you lost her." "Me too. But if she were here, she'd have done the same thing I did. Probably would have done it faster and with better food." He smiled slightly. "She always said I had the emotional range of a fence post." "I think you're doing fine." "That's because you've got low standards." She laughed, genuine and unexpected. It felt strange, good strange. Outside, the storm howled, but inside, something warmer than fire was beginning to grow. The blizzard lasted 3 days. By the time it cleared, the world had turned into something unrecognizable. Drifts piled so high against the barn that Mara had to dig a tunnel just to reach the door. Her hands blistered from the shovel work, then froze, then blistered again. She didn't complain. Coulter noticed anyway. "Let me see," he said on the 4th morning, catching her wrist as she reached for her coffee. "They're fine. They're bleeding." He turned her palm up, examining the raw flesh. "You keep working like this, you'll get infection. Then we'll have bigger problems than snow." "I've had worse." "I don't doubt it, but there's a difference between surviving and being stupid about it." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a tin of salve that smelled like pine tar and something medicinal. "Hold still." She flinched when he applied it, but he was surprisingly gentle for a man with hands that looked like they'd been carved from wood. He wrapped her palms in clean strips of cloth, his movements efficient but careful. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me. Just wear gloves tomorrow." "I don't have any that fit." Coulter grunted and went to a chest by the door. He pulled out a pair of leatherwork gloves, worn soft with age. These were Sarah's. She had small hands too. Mara took them carefully, like they might break. "Are you sure?" "She's not using them." His voice was matter of fact, but something flickered in his expression. Might as well be useful to someone. That afternoon, wearing the gloves that had belonged to a dead woman she'd never meet, Mara split firewood until her arms shook. The gloves fit perfectly. Winter settled in hard after that. The days blurred together in a routine of survival, feeding livestock, breaking ice on water troughs, checking trap lines, hauling supplies. Mara's soft hands turned calloused. Her hesitant movements became confident. The frightened girl who'd hidden behind the barn started to disappear, replaced by someone harder, sharper. Someone who could survive. 2 months in, Coulter took her out to the shooting range in the gray dawn light. The temperature had dropped below 0 overnight, cold enough that their breath hung in clouds. "You've been practicing," he said, watching her load the revolver without fumbling. "Every day when you're checking the fences." "Show me." She fired 6 shots, 5 hit the targets. The 6th grazed the edge. Coulter nodded slowly. "Not bad." "Not bad? That's the best I've done yet." "It's good shooting, but good's not the same as ready." He set up fresh bottles. "Out here, you don't get practice rounds. You get one chance, usually when you're scared or tired or both. So we're going to make it harder." "How?" He pulled out a pocket watch. "You've got 10 seconds to draw and hit 3 targets, starting now." She fumbled the draw, rushed the first shot, missed entirely. By the time she steadied herself, the 10 seconds were gone. Again, they drilled for 2 hours. Draw, aim, fire. Again. Again. Her fingers went numb inside the gloves. Her shoulder ached from the recoil, but slowly, incrementally, she got faster, more accurate. Better, Coulter said finally. But you're still thinking too much. When it matters, you won't have time to think. You need the muscle memory. I'm trying. I know. That's why we keep at it. He collected the spent shells. You're tougher than you look, you know that? The compliment caught her off guard. I don't feel tough. Tough's not about how you feel. It's about what you do when you're scared. He glanced at her. You were terrified when I found you. Still did what needed doing. That's the only kind of tough that matters out here. Something warm bloomed in her chest. She looked away, pretending to study the targets. My father used to say something like that before he died. Smart man. Stubborn man. He worked himself into the ground trying to keep the farm going after my mother got sick. Wouldn't ask for help. Wouldn't admit when things were falling apart. Her voice went quiet. I used to think he was foolish for it. Now I think maybe he just didn't know any other way to be. Most of us don't, Coulter said. We just do what we can with what we've got. They walked back to the house in silence, the snow crunching under their boots. Mara had gotten used to these quiet stretches between them, the way conversations could exist in pauses and glances instead of constant words. It was different from the desperate chatter of the boarding house, where silence meant suspicion. Here, silence was just another kind of understanding. That evening, while Mara prepared dinner, Coulter brought in the mail he'd picked up from the distant Crossroads post. Most of it was supply catalogs and notices, but one letter made him go still. What is it? Mara asked, noticing the change in his posture. Letter from Tom Briggs. He runs the general store in Fort Benton. Coulter scanned the contents, his jaw tightening. Says the sheriff's still asking around about you. Posted notices in 3 counties. They're offering a reward now. The spoon slipped from Mara's hand, clattering against the pot. How much? $50. It might as well have been $1,000. $50 was 6 months' wages for most ranch hands. People had been killed for less. I should leave. She was already moving toward the stairs. Tonight, before someone... Stop. Coulter's voice was firm but not harsh. Running now's worse than staying put. It's the dead of winter. You wouldn't make it 10 miles. But if someone comes here, then we deal with it. But panicking helps nobody. He set the letter down. How many people know about this ranch? I don't know. Not many? Exactly. I keep to myself. Don't trade in Fort Benton often. Most folks forget this place exists. He met her eyes. You're safer here than anywhere else in the territory right now. You don't know that. I know that out there you're alone. Here, you're not. He said it simply, like it was an obvious fact rather than something that made her throat tight. We'll be careful. Keep watch. But you're not running back into winter on account of a letter. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was risking too much for someone he barely knew. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with gratitude and fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. Why are you doing this? She asked instead. Really? And don't say it's practical or that you needed help. You could hire a ranch hand for less trouble than I'm causing. Coulter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something unspoken. Because when I found you behind that barn, I saw someone fighting to stay alive. And I've spent 6 years not caring much whether I lived or died. Seemed like maybe helping you fight was a way to remember what that felt like. Caring about something. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Mara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away furiously. I care about not getting you killed, she said, aiming for levity and missing. Then don't get caught. Seems simple enough? Despite everything, she laughed. It came out shaky but real. You make it sound easy. Never said easy, just simple. She turned back to the stove, stirring the stew with hands that trembled slightly. Thank you for not sending me away. Where else would you go? It was meant as a practical question, but it hit deeper than that. Where else would she go? She'd spent 2 years in Fort Benton without making a single real friend, spent her whole life moving from place to place, never quite belonging anywhere. And now here, in this rough cabin in the middle of nowhere, with a man who spoke in grunts and showed kindness through actions rather than words, She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. December rolled into January. The cold bit deeper, vicious and unrelenting. Wolves started coming closer to the ranch, driven by hunger. Mara heard them at night sometimes, their howls echoing across the frozen landscape like ghost songs. One morning, she found tracks circling the barn, huge paw prints that made her stomach clench. "We need to move the chickens inside," Coulter said when she showed him. "And double-check the fences tonight. Wolves get desperate this time of year." They spent the day reinforcing weak points in the fencing, stringing wire, hammering posts into frozen ground that fought back with every strike. By nightfall, Mara's entire body ached. But when she heard something moving outside after dark, she grabbed the loaded revolver from her bedside without hesitation. Coulter was already awake, rifle in hand. "Stay inside," he said. "Not a chance." He looked like he wanted to argue, then just sighed. "Fine, but stay behind me and don't shoot unless I tell you to." They moved into the cold together. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows, turning the snow-covered landscape into something alien and beautiful. At first, Mara didn't see anything. Then Coulter pointed. 3 wolves, lean and desperate, had cornered one of the young steers near the far fence. The animal was terrified, wild-eyed, stamping in the snow. "Can you hit the one on the left?" Coulter whispered. Mara's heart hammered. She'd shot at bottles and targets, never at something alive, never at something that could die. "Mara, can you?" She raised the revolver. Her hands were steady, all those hours of practice taking over when fear tried to shake her. She sighted down the barrel, let out a slow breath, and fired. The wolf yelped and scattered. The others followed, disappearing into the darkness. The shot hadn't killed it. She could see it limping away. But it was enough. "Good shot," Coulter said. Mara lowered the gun, feeling sick. "I heard it." "You saved the steer, and probably saved that wolf from starving slower. Out here, quick and hurt beats slow and certain." He touched her shoulder briefly. "You did what needed doing. That's what matters." They brought the steer in closer to the barn. Back inside, Mara couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the wolf's eyes in the moonlight, kept hearing the sound it made when the bullet hit. It wasn't guilt exactly, just the weight of understanding that survival out here meant hard choices, and she was learning to make them. By February, she could outshoot most of the targets Coulter set up, could ride the difficult horses without getting thrown, could track animals through snow and read weather in the clouds. The transformation wasn't dramatic, no single moment when she suddenly became someone new. It was gradual, built from 1,000 small lessons and hard-won competencies. She caught Coulter watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not attraction exactly, something more complicated. Respect maybe, or recognition. One afternoon, while they were mending tack in the barn, he said, "You're different than when you got here." "Different how?" "Stronger. Not just physically. You stand different, move different." He tested a leather strap, checking for weak points. "The girl who showed up here would have run from those wolves. You stood your ground." "I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." He glanced at her. "Sarah used to say that, usually right before she did something I thought was too dangerous." It was the most he'd talked about his wife in weeks. Mara set down the bridle she was working on. "What was she like?" Stubborn, smart, had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them." His mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. "She hated the isolation out here at first, missed having other women to talk to, but she adapted, built a garden that shouldn't have survived this climate, started teaching ranch hands to read because she couldn't stand the idea of illiteracy, made this place feel like more than just surviving. You must miss her terribly, every day. But it's different now than it was." He paused, choosing words carefully. "The first few years, I couldn't think about her without feeling like I was drowning. Now I can remember the good parts without the bad parts drowning them out." He looked at Mara directly. "Having you here helped with that. Don't know why exactly, but it did." Mara's chest tightened. "I'm glad. And I'm grateful you took a chance on me. Wasn't much of a chance. You're one of the hardest workers I've ever had. Still, you didn't have to." "No, but I'm glad I did." He returned to his work. "You planning to stay past spring?" The question surprised her. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. Might want to start. California's a long way off, and you'll need a plan if you're going. What if I don't want to go to California? Then you'll need a different plan. She smiled despite herself. You're not very helpful. I'm practical. There's a difference. They worked in comfortable silence after that, but Mara's mind churned. She'd spent months focused entirely on survival, getting through each day, learning each skill, avoiding capture. She hadn't let herself think about what came after, about what she actually wanted beyond just not being hunted. Did she want to keep running? Find some distant city where nobody knew her name and start over as someone else? Or did she want something different? The question followed her through the rest of February and into early March, when the worst of the winter started to break. The days grew incrementally longer. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing brown grass underneath. And then, on a gray afternoon when Mara was hauling water from the creek, she saw the rider. He was distant, just a dark shape against the horizon, but he was clearly heading toward the ranch. Her heart lurched into her throat. She dropped the buckets and ran for the house. Coulter! He was outside immediately, rifle already in hand. He followed her gaze to the approaching rider, and his expression hardened. Inside, now! But Mara, inside. She wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him, but the tone in his voice left no room for debate. She went inside, grabbed her revolver, and positioned herself by the window where she could see but not be easily seen. The rider approached slowly, hands visible, clearly trying to appear non-threatening. As he got closer, Mara could make out details. A man in his 40s, weathered face, wearing a sheriff's badge that glinted in the weak sunlight. Her blood turned to ice. The sheriff reined in about 20 feet from where Coulter stood. Afternoon. Sheriff? Coulter's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. Long way from Fort Benton. Making rounds, checking in with the outlying ranches. The sheriff's eyes scanned the property with practiced efficiency. Name's Bill Morrison. Don't believe we've met. Coulter Hayes. This is my land. Good land. Remote, though. Must get lonely out here. I prefer it that way. Morrison nodded slowly, like he understood but wasn't entirely convinced. I'll be direct with you, Mr. Hayes. I'm looking for a fugitive. Young woman, mid-20s, dark hair, goes by Mara Vale. She's wanted for theft and possibly worse. You seen anyone matching that description? Inside, Mara's hands tightened on the revolver. Through the window, she watched Coulter's face remain completely impassive. Can't say I have. Like I said, I keep to myself out here. You sure about that? Because I've got reason to believe she might have headed this direction. Woman running from the law, she'd look for somewhere isolated, somewhere folks don't ask questions. Then she picked the wrong ranch. I'm particular about who I let on my property. Morrison studied him for a long moment. Mind if I look around, just to be thorough? I do mind, actually. Coulter's voice stayed level, but something dangerous crept into it. This is private land, Sheriff. You've got no warrant, no evidence I'm harboring anyone, and no right to search my property without cause. I could get a warrant. Then get one. But until you do, I'd appreciate you respecting my boundaries. The tension stretched taut. Mara could see the calculation in Morrison's eyes, weighing his authority against the fact that he was one man, far from backup, facing a rancher who clearly knew his rights and didn't look like he'd back down. Finally, Morrison tipped his hat. Fair enough. But if you do see this woman, there's a reward. $50. That's a lot of money for information. If I see her, I'll let you know. Appreciate it. Morrison turned his horse, then paused. Word of advice, Mr. Hayes. Whatever you think you know about isolation protecting you, it doesn't. Law reaches everywhere eventually, even out here. I'll keep that in mind. Mara watched the sheriff ride away, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She didn't move until he was completely out of sight, until Coulter came back inside and locked the door behind him. He knows, she whispered. He suspects. Big difference. He'll come back. Maybe. But not without a warrant, and he's got no grounds for one. Coulter set the rifle down. You didn't panic. That's good. I feel like I'm going to throw up. That's normal. Fear's got to go somewhere. He poured her water. Drink. Slow. She obeyed, her hands shaking so badly water slopped over the rim. What do? We stay smart. Keep you out of sight when I go to town. Vary our routines so nothing looks suspicious." He met her eyes. "And we make a decision." "About what?" "About whether you stay or go. Because Morrison's not the end of this. Someone's pushing hard to find you, and they're not going to stop." His voice was serious but not unkind. "I meant what I said. You're safe here for now. But for now isn't forever. Eventually we'll have to figure out what comes next." Mara sank into a chair, feeling the weight of those words. She'd been living in a kind of suspended reality, where the past couldn't reach her and the future didn't exist. But Morrison's visit shattered that illusion. "I don't want to run anymore," she said quietly. "Then don't. But if they keep coming, then we deal with it. Together." He said it firmly, like it was already decided. "You're not alone in this, Mara. Not unless you want to be." She looked up at him, this man who'd become something she hadn't expected. Not a savior, not a replacement for everything she'd lost. Just someone solid and real who'd chosen to stand beside her when he had every reason to walk away. "I don't want to be alone," she admitted. "Good, because neither do I." Something shifted between them in that moment, subtle but significant. An acknowledgement that whatever this was, it had become more than just a temporary arrangement, more than just survival. The next morning, Coulter did something that shocked her. He saddled both horses and told her they were going to town. "Are you insane?" Mara stared at him. "The sheriff was just here. Everyone's looking for me. And you want to ride straight into Fort Benton?" "Not Fort Benton. Virginia City. It's further south, different jurisdiction. Less likely anyone there's seen the wanted notices yet." He adjusted his saddle. "And we need supplies. Been putting it off, but we can't anymore. Send me away." "Go yourself." "No." "Coulter, you can't hide forever, Mara. Sooner or later you'll have to exist in the world again. Might as well start now, where it's relatively safe." He handed her the reins to the roan mare. "Besides, I'm tired of pretending you don't exist. Hiding feels wrong." "Hiding keeps me alive." "Maybe. Or maybe it just keeps you scared." He swung into his saddle. "Come on, we'll stay on the back trails. Be careful, but you're coming with me." She wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, stay safe. But another part of her, the part that had been growing stronger these past months, wanted to do exactly what he suggested. Stop hiding. Stop running. Face the world and dare it to come after her. So she mounted the horse. They rode for 3 hours, mostly in silence. The landscape was transforming as winter loosened its grip, patches of green appearing where snow had melted, water running in creeks that had been frozen solid for months. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Virginia City was smaller than Fort Benton, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a main street. They tied the horses outside the general store and went inside together. The storekeeper, an older man with kind eyes, nodded to Coulter. "Hayes, been a while." "Needed supplies. This is my ranch hand, Mara." The lie came so smoothly that Mara almost believed it herself. The storekeeper barely glanced at her before returning his attention to Coulter. "What can I get you?" While Coulter discussed supplies, Mara drifted toward the shelves, her eyes scanning canned goods and dry provisions. It felt surreal being in public after months of isolation. She kept expecting someone to recognize her, to point and shout. But nobody paid her any attention. She was just another anonymous face in a territory full of them. At the counter, she heard Coulter's voice drop. "Heard there's trouble up in Fort Benton. Sheriff making rounds." The storekeeper grunted. "Morrison." "Yeah, he's been asking questions. Looking for some girl who supposedly stole from the Kinsleys." "You believe it?" "Don't know what to believe. Kinsleys have money and Morrison has ambition. Sometimes those two things make the truth complicated." He wrapped supplies in brown paper. "Why? You seen her?" "No, just curious. Isolated as I am, I like to know what's happening in the territory." "Smart. Things are changing out here. Not always for the better." They loaded the supplies and left without incident. As they rode out of town, Mara felt something loosen in her chest. She'd walked through a public space, talked to people, briefly, but still, and the sky hadn't fallen. "See," Coulter said, "not so bad. I was terrified the entire time." "I know, but you did it anyway. That's what matters." They made camp that night under a sky so full of stars, it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. Coulter built a small fire while Mara tended the horses. When she sat down beside him, he handed her coffee so strong it could strip paint. "Thank you," she said, "for today, for making me go. You needed to know you could." "I think I needed you to believe I could." She stared into the fire. "Nobody's ever done that before. Believed in me." "Then you've known the wrong people." She laughed softly. "Maybe." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Overhead, a shooting star streaked across the darkness. "Make a wish," Coulter said. "I thought you didn't believe in wishes." "I don't. But Sarah did. She'd always stop whatever she was doing to make one." His voice was warm with memory. "Drove me crazy. But I miss it now." Mara closed her eyes and wished. Not for freedom or safety or revenge, just for this moment, this peace, this feeling of belonging somewhere. When she opened them again, Coulter was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just, you're smiling. First time I've seen you really smile since you got here. I have things to smile about now." Something passed between them then, a recognition of what was slowly building in the spaces between words. Neither of them named it. Neither of them was ready to. But it was there, undeniable as the stars overhead. They rode back to the ranch the next day, arriving at sunset. As Mara dismounted and looked at the simple house she'd called home for months, she realized something had changed. She wasn't hiding here anymore. She was living here. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. Spring came slowly to Montana that year, like it was testing the ground before committing. The snow retreated in patches, leaving behind mud so thick it could swallow a boot whole. Mara spent her mornings breaking ice that reformed overnight in the water troughs. Her afternoons mending fences the winter had weakened. The work never stopped, but she'd stopped resenting it. Her body had adapted, muscles where there used to be softness, calluses where her hands used to blister. She was splitting wood behind the barn one April morning when Coulter appeared with 2 fishing poles. "Come on," he said. "I've got half a cord left to split." "It'll keep. The creek's running high and the trout are biting." He was already walking toward the tree line. "You've been working yourself into the ground for weeks. Take a break." She wanted to argue that he'd been working just as hard, but the truth was she couldn't remember the last time either of them had stopped for something that wasn't strictly necessary. She set down the axe and followed him. The creek had transformed from the frozen silence of winter into something alive and rushing, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains. Coulter found a spot where the water pooled into a wide bend and handed her one of the poles. "You know how to fish?" "My father taught me, long time ago." She studied the crude line and hook. "Though we used better equipment than this." "This is Montana. We make do." He baited his hook with practiced efficiency and cast it into the deeper water. "Besides, fancy equipment doesn't catch fish. Patience does." Mara followed his lead, her cast landing awkwardly but serviceable. They stood side by side in the weak spring sunshine, the sound of rushing water filling the silence between them. After a while, Coulter said, "You've been quiet lately, more than usual." "Have I?" "Last few weeks especially. Something on your mind?" She watched the line drift in the current, considering how much to say. "I've been thinking about what happens next." "Next as in summer, or next as in after?" "Both." She glanced at him. "You said I should make a plan, figure out what I want, but every time I try, I don't know what that looks like anymore." "What do you mean?" "Before all this, I thought I wanted to be somewhere safe, somewhere nobody knew me, start fresh where my past couldn't follow." She paused. "But now I'm not sure that's what I want, or if it ever was." Coulter reeled in his line, checked the bait, cast again. "What changed?" "I did." The admission felt significant somehow. The person who ran from Fort Benton, she was scared all the time, felt like the world was something that happened to her, not something she could shape. But now, she struggled for the right words. "Now I feel like maybe I could shape it, if I was brave enough." "You're plenty brave." "I'm terrified half the time." "Being brave and being terrified aren't opposites. They're usually the same thing." He glanced at her. "So what do you want to shape?" The question hung between them. Mara felt her heart beating faster, felt the weight of what she was about to say. I want to stop running. I want to prove I didn't do what they said, and I want— She stopped, courage failing. Want what? I want to stay here. It came out quieter than she intended. If you'd let me. Coulter went very still. His line drifted forgotten in the current. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. You'd want to stay? Even knowing Morrison could come back? Even knowing you're risking everything by being here? Maybe because of that. I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. She met his eyes. This is the first place I've ever felt like I belonged. The first time I've had someone who— She faltered, then pushed forward. Someone who sees me as more than just what happened to me. And I don't want to give that up. Something shifted in Coulter's expression. A wall coming down, revealing something raw underneath. Mara, I need to tell you something. What? When Sarah died, I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd just work this ranch until my body gave out, and that would be enough of a life. He set down his fishing pole. Then you showed up, half dead and pointing an empty gun at me, and everything changed. At first I told myself I was just helping someone in need, being decent. But it became more than that. What did it become? It became me waking up and having a reason to. It became looking forward to morning coffee because you'd be there arguing with me about how I make it too strong. It became this house feeling like a home again instead of just a place I sleep. He took a breath. It became me caring about someone again. About you. Mara's throat tightened. Coulter, I'm not asking you for anything, he said quickly. I know you've been through hell. I know the last thing you probably want is some widower complicating your life. But if you stay, you should know that you're not just my ranch hand, you're— He stopped, seemed to wrestle with the words. You're important to me, more important than I probably should let you be. For a long moment, the only sound was the rushing creek and the wind through the pines. Then Mara crossed the distance between them and took his hand. His fingers were rough, scarred from years of hard work, and they closed around hers with surprising gentleness. I care about you too, she said. I tried not to. Tried to keep my distance because I thought I'd be leaving, but I can't stop thinking about you, about this place, about what it would mean to build something here instead of running from what I left behind. Coulter's jaw worked. The world out there, they still think you're a criminal. That doesn't go away just because we want it to. I know. But maybe together we can do something about it. She squeezed his hand. You made me believe I was stronger than I thought. Maybe I can face Fort Benton again. Face the people who destroyed my reputation and make them see the truth. That's dangerous. Everything worth doing is— He almost smiled. Sarah used to say that too. Smart woman. The smartest. He looked down at their joined hands. If you're serious about this, about staying, about fighting back, then we do it right. No more hiding, no more pretending you're just hired help. If you're staying as yourself. What does that mean? It means we go to town together. We face down the whispers and the stares. We show them you're not some ghost they can hunt. His voice was firm. And it means I stand beside you while you do it, publicly, so there's no question whose side I'm on. Fear and hope warred in Mara's chest. They'll turn on you too, the ranchers, the townspeople. You'll lose everything you've built here. I've already lost everything once. Survived it then? I'll survive it now. He lifted her hand, pressed it briefly to his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. But I'm not losing you. Not if I can help it. Something broke open inside her. All the walls she'd built to protect herself from caring too much, from hoping too hard. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Don't deserve you. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard you say. He reached up, wiped a tear away with his thumb. You deserve a whole lot more than what life's given you. And if I can help you get even a piece of that back, I'm going to try. She kissed him then, before she could overthink it. It was clumsy and tentative and tasted like salt from her tears. But when he kissed her back, his hand cradling the back of her head, it felt like the first entirely right thing that had happened in her life for as long as she could remember. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Coulter rested his forehead against hers. We're going to have to be smart about this, he said. I know. And careful. I know. And you're sure? Because once we start down this road, I'm sure. She kissed him again, softer this time. I've never been more sure of anything. They didn't catch any fish that day. By the time they walked back to the ranch, hand in hand, the sun was setting and the world had turned the color of fire. Mara felt different somehow, lighter, despite the weight of what lay ahead. For the first time in months, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She was looking forward. That night, after dinner, they sat by the fire and talked about practical things. When to make the trip to Fort Benton. How to approach it. What Mara would say if confronted. The conversation was serious, focused, but underneath it ran a current of something new and fragile. Every time their eyes met, Mara felt it. This understanding that they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. We should wait a few weeks, Coulter said. Let the snow melt more. Roads will be easier. And it gives Morrison time to move on to other things. Maybe. Or maybe it just gives him time to dig deeper. He poked the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. Either way, we need a story that holds together. You can't just show up and demand they listen. What kind of story? The truth, but presented right. You were working at the boarding house. Thomas Kinsley assaulted you. You defended yourself and ran because you knew how it would look. You've been surviving out here, working honest jobs, trying to rebuild your life. He glanced at her. And you've got a witness willing to testify that you're not the person they think you are. You. Me. Local rancher, no connection to the Kinsleys, no reason to lie. It's not proof, but it's something. Mara hugged her knees to her chest. What if nobody believes us? What if they just arrest me on sight? Then we deal with that too. But I don't think it'll come to that. Morrison's ambitious, but he's not stupid. If there's reasonable doubt, he won't push too hard without evidence. Coulter's voice was steady, reassuring. And from what you've told me, there is no evidence, because you didn't do anything. Thomas could be anywhere, could be dead, could be hiding, could be laughing about the chaos he caused. Could be. But that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is telling your side of the story and letting the chips fall where they may. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the truth would somehow win out over accusations and assumptions. But she'd seen too much of the world to have that kind of faith. Still, she had something now she hadn't had before. She had Coulter, and that made all the difference. Over the next 3 weeks, they prepared. Coulter rode into Virginia City and quietly asked around about the situation in Fort Benton, learning that the search for Mara had cooled somewhat, but the accusations remained. He bought Mara a proper dress, nothing fancy, but clean and respectable, and new boots that didn't have holes worn through the soles. They practiced what she'd say, how she'd carry herself, how to project confidence even when fear was eating her alive. And slowly, day by day, Mara felt herself transforming again. Not into someone different, into someone more fully herself than she'd ever been allowed to be. The morning they finally set out for Fort Benton, the sky was clear and achingly blue. Mara dressed in the new clothes, braided her hair, and stared at her reflection in the small mirror. The woman looking back was unrecognizable from the terrified girl who'd hidden behind Coulter's barn 6 months ago. This woman had steady hands and clear eyes. This woman looked like she could stand up for herself. "Ready?" Coulter asked from the doorway. "No, but I'm going anyway." "That's the spirit." He offered his hand. "Come on. Let's go remind Fort Benton who Mara Vale really is." The ride took most of the day. They talked sporadically, fell into comfortable silences, shared food when they stopped to rest the horses. As they got closer to town, Mara felt her anxiety ratcheting higher. Her hands started to shake. Her breathing came faster. Coulter noticed immediately. He reined in his horse and waited for her to do the same. "Look at me," he said. She did. "You're not the same person who ran from here. You're stronger now, tougher, and you're not alone." He leaned across the space between their horses and took her hand. "Whatever happens in there, we face it together. Understand?" "Together," she repeated, and felt some of the fear loosen its grip. They rode into Fort Benton just before sunset. The town looked exactly as Mara remembered. Weathered buildings, dusty streets, people moving about their business with the weary determination of frontier life. At first, nobody paid them any attention. Just 2 more riders coming into town. Then someone recognized her. It was a woman Mara had worked with at the boarding house, a hard-faced matron named Clara. She stopped dead in the street, her eyes going wide. "Mara Vale," she breathed. Then louder, "That's Mara Vale." Heads turned, conversations died. Within seconds, what felt like the entire town was staring at them. Mara's first instinct was to run. Her horse shifted beneath her, sensing her fear, but then she felt Coulter's presence beside her, solid and unwavering, and she forced herself to sit up straighter. "Evening, Clara," she said, her voice only shaking slightly. Clara backed up a step. "You've got some nerve showing your face here." "I've got the truth." Figured it was time people heard it. A crowd was gathering now. Mara recognized faces. The blacksmith, the general store owner, people who'd smiled at her when she lived here and then turned their backs the moment she was accused. The weight of their judgment pressed down like a physical thing. Then Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on his gun. "Miss Vale," he said coldly, "didn't expect to see you back here." "I didn't expect to come back, but I'm tired of running from lies." She dismounted, forcing her legs to stay steady. Coulter did the same, positioning himself slightly in front of her. Morrison's eyes flicked to him. "Mr. Hayes, told you I'd find her eventually." "She's not hiding, Sheriff. She's here voluntarily to clear her name." "That's not how the law works." "Then maybe the law needs to hear her side of the story before making arrests." Coulter's voice was level but hard. "Because, from where I'm standing, you've been chasing an innocent woman for 6 months based on nothing but hearsay." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Morrison's jaw tightened. "I have witness statements. You have accusations from one family and a town that decided she was guilty before asking questions," Coulter interrupted. "That's not justice. That's a mob." "You calling me a mob, Hayes?" "I'm calling this what it is. A rush to judgment." He looked around at the gathered townspeople. "How many of you actually saw Mara Vale steal anything? How many saw her harm Thomas Kinsley?" Silence. "That's what I thought. You all just heard the Kinsleys say it and decided it must be true because they've got money, and she doesn't." "That's not fair," Clara protested. "Thomas disappeared. His horse came back without him. And she ran that same night. What else were we supposed to think?" "You were supposed to ask questions," Mara said, finding her voice. "You were supposed to wonder why I'd run if I was guilty, why I'd leave everything behind, my job, my room, my entire life, over a watch and a horse I never took." "Then where's Thomas?" someone shouted from the crowd. "I don't know, but I didn't kill him. I didn't steal from him. What I did was tell him no when he tried to force himself on me, and I hit him with a shovel when he wouldn't stop." She raised her voice, making sure everyone could hear. "He assaulted me. I defended myself. And I ran because I knew nobody would believe me over the foreman's son." More murmurs. These sounded different, uncertain, questioning. Morrison stepped forward. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Vale. So is murder. But you didn't seem too concerned about evidence before you put a bounty on my head." You were following the Kinsleys' version of events without question." Mara's fear was burning away, replaced by anger she'd been carrying for months. "Did you even look for Thomas? Or did you just assume I'd killed him, and that was that?" "We searched." "Did you search the places he liked to go? Did you talk to his friends about whether he might have run off? Did you consider that maybe, just maybe, a man who'd assault a woman might have other secrets worth running from?" The crowd was shifting now. Mara could see doubt creeping into faces that had been set against her. "I've been living on Coulter Hayes Ranch for 6 months, she continued. "Working, surviving, not spending stolen money or living in luxury. Does that sound like a thief to you? Does that sound like a murderer?" "Sounds like someone hiding," Morrison said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty, or someone trying to stay alive long enough for the truth to matter. Mara took a step forward. "I came back here because I'm done being afraid. Done letting you all decide who I am based on lies. My name is Mara Vale. I worked at the boarding house. I never stole anything. And I'm not guilty of whatever you think I did." The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't hostile, it was thoughtful. Then a voice cut through the quiet. "She's telling the truth." Everyone turned. A young man pushed through the crowd, someone Mara vaguely recognized from the stables. He looked nervous but determined. "I saw what happened that night," he said. "I saw Thomas go into the stable where Mara was working. Saw him stumble out later holding his head. He was drunk and angry. Said she'd hit him for no reason, but—" He swallowed hard. But I heard her scream before that. Heard him laughing. And when he came out, his shirt was torn. I should have said something then, but I was scared of losing my job. Morrison turned on him. Why didn't you come forward before? Because the Kinsleys sign my pay. Because I've got a family to feed. Because, he looked at Mara. Because I was a coward. But I can't keep quiet anymore. She's telling the truth. Thomas did something to her, and whatever happened after, she was defending herself. The crowd erupted in conversation. Morrison looked like he'd swallowed something sour. The certainty he'd carried before was crumbling. One witness doesn't, he started. One witness is more than you had before, Coulter said. And it contradicts your entire theory. Seems like maybe you need to reconsider who the criminal is here. Morrison's hand was still on his gun, but Mara could see him calculating. Could see him realizing that arresting her now would look bad. Would raise questions. Would undermine whatever authority he had left. Finally, he said, I'll need statements from both of you, and I'll need to talk to the Kinsleys again. That's fine, Mara said. I'm not running anymore. Where will you be staying? With me, Coulter said firmly. At my ranch, where she's been all along. Morrison didn't like it, but he couldn't argue. Not with half the town watching. Fine, but don't leave the territory. Wasn't planning on it. The sheriff turned and walked away, the crowd parting for him. Slowly, people began to disperse, though many lingered, whispering. Some looked at Mara with something like apology. Others still looked suspicious, but nobody was calling for her arrest. Clara approached hesitantly. Mara, we didn't know. You didn't want to know, Mara said, but without venom. You wanted the easy answer, the simple story. But life out here isn't simple, and neither are people. I'm sorry, for what it's worth. It's worth something, not everything, but something. Mara turned toward Coulter. We should find a place to stay tonight. Give Morrison time to do his job properly this time. They ended up at the same boarding house where Mara used to work. The current owner, a different woman than before, was cautious but allowed them 2 rooms. That night, Mara lay awake staring at the ceiling, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. A soft knock came at her door. It's me, Coulter's voice said. She opened it. He stood there in the dim hallway looking as unsettled as she felt. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Too much running through my head. He paused. You did good today. Really good. I was terrified. I know, but you stood up anyway. That's what mattered. He reached for her hand. Can I stay? Just to talk. I'm not. I know what you mean. She pulled him into the room and closed the door. They sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders touching, fingers intertwined. Do you think Morrison will really investigate? Mara asked. I think he'll do enough to cover himself, whether that leads anywhere. Coulter shrugged. Hard to say. But you've planted doubt. That's the first step. The stable hand who spoke up. I don't even remember his name. Sometimes courage comes from unexpected places. They sat in silence for a while, just being near each other. Finally, Mara said, When this is over, really over, what happens to us? What do you want to happen? She took a breath. I want to keep working the ranch with you. I want to build something there. Maybe expand it. Take on more livestock. Build a better barn. She looked at him. I want to make a life. With you. Coulter's eyes shone in the dim light. Yeah? Yeah, if you'll have me. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. I'll have you. However you'll let me. Then I'm yours. For as long as you'll keep me. That's going to be a long time, Maravale. Good. She rested her head on his shoulder. Because I'm not going anywhere. Not anymore. They stayed like that until dawn, holding each other while the town slept around them. Outside, the world was still dangerous. The accusations hadn't disappeared. The fight wasn't over. But inside that small room, they'd found something worth fighting for. And that made all the difference. Morning came too quickly. Mara woke to sunlight streaming through the boarding house window and Coulter's steady breathing beside her. They'd fallen asleep fully clothed, wrapped around each other like they were afraid to let go. She studied his face in the early light, the lines carved by grief and hard living, the gray threading through his beard, the unexpected softness in his expression when he slept. He opened his eyes and caught her staring. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Morning?" She brushed her thumb across his cheekbone. "We should get moving. Morrison will be expecting us." "Let him wait a few more minutes." He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, burying her face against his chest. For just a moment, she let herself pretend they were back at the ranch, that yesterday's confrontation hadn't happened, that the world was just the two of them and nothing else mattered. But reality didn't care what she pretended. They dressed in silence, the weight of what lay ahead settling between them. Downstairs, the boarding house owner had set out a meager breakfast, coffee, bread, some questionable eggs. Mara forced herself to eat, knowing she'd need the energy. "You don't have to do this," Coulter said quietly. "We could leave right now, forget the whole thing, and spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder?" "No." She met his eyes. "I need to finish this. Need to look these people in the face and make them admit they were wrong." "What if they don't?" "Then at least I'll know I tried." They found Sheriff Morrison at his office, a cramped building that smelled like old coffee and resignation. He looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes red-rimmed and irritable. "Miss Vale. Hayes." He gestured to two rickety chairs. "Sit. We need to talk." Mara sat back straight, hands folded in her lap. Beside her, Coulter radiated quiet support. Morrison pulled out a notebook. "I spoke with the stable hand. Name's Peter Marsh. His story corroborates yours about the assault. Says he heard you scream, heard Thomas laughing, saw him come out looking roughed up. So you believe me now?" "I believe there's more to this than the Kinsleys told me." Morrison rubbed his face. "I also went back through the initial search records. We found Thomas's horse by the river, but we never found a body. Never found the watch or any stolen property, just assumed he was dead and you'd taken his things." "Assumed," Mara said bitterly. "That's a generous word for what happened." "I know, and I'm—" He struggled with the words. "I'm sorry. I should have dug deeper. Should have questioned the Kinsleys' version of events, but they're powerful around here, and I thought—" "You thought it was easier to blame the woman with no family and no money," Coulter finished coldly. Morrison didn't argue. "Yeah, that's about the size of it." "So what now?" Mara asked. "Now I need to talk to the Kinsleys again. Specifically, I need to talk to John Marsh, the foreman. Peter's his brother. Didn't put that together until this morning. Apparently John's known about Thomas's behavior for years, but never said anything because the Kinsleys pay too well. Will he talk to you?" "Don't know, but I'm going to find out." Morrison looked at Mara directly. "I need you to come with me. To the Kinsley ranch. To face them." Every nerve in Mara's body screamed no. The thought of going back to that place, of seeing the people who destroyed her reputation without a second thought, made her stomach turn. But she'd come this far. "All right," she said. "When?" "Today. Now, if you're willing." Coulter's hand found hers under the table. "We're both coming." It's not negotiable, Sheriff." She goes, I go. Morrison sighed but nodded. "Fine. But let me do the talking. This is official business, not a social call." They rode out to the Kinsley ranch in Morrison's wagon, the same route Mara had taken hundreds of times when she'd worked there. Every landmark felt like a wound reopening. The bend in the road where Thomas had first cornered her, the grove of cottonwoods where she'd hidden when she needed to cry, the hill that overlooked the ranch buildings. The place looked exactly the same. Big house, well-maintained barn, corrals full of expensive horses. Money and power made visible in wood and stone. Thomas Kinsley Sr. came out to meet them, a tall man in his 50s with cold eyes and an entitled bearing. Behind him stood John Marsh, the foreman, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Sheriff," Kinsley said curtly, "wasn't expecting you today. We need to talk. About your son. About the accusations against Miss Vale." Morrison gestured to Mara. "She's come forward with new information." Kinsley's face hardened when he saw her. "That woman has no business being here. She's wanted for crimes she may not have committed," Morrison interrupted. "And I've got witnesses saying Thomas assaulted her the night he disappeared." "That's a lie." "Is it? Because I've got two stable hands who say otherwise. One of them heard her scream, saw your son come out looking like he'd been in a fight." My son would never. Your son had a reputation, Mr. Kinsley. Morrison's voice was hard. You know it. John knows it. Hell, half the county knows it. But you all kept quiet because he was your boy, and you had the money to make problems disappear. Kinsley's jaw clenched. You're out of line, Sheriff. No, I'm about 6 months late doing my job properly. Morrison pulled out his notebook. Where's Thomas now? I don't know. I told you. You told me he was dead, that Miss Vale killed him and stole his belongings. But we never found a body. Never found any proof she took anything. So I'm asking again, where is your son? The silence stretched taut. John Marsh shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Kinsley and the sheriff. Finally, Kinsley said, He's in San Francisco. The words landed like a physical blow. Mara felt the air leave her lungs. What? Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet. He's in San Francisco, has been since 3 days after he disappeared. He sent me a telegram 2 weeks after he left. Said he'd gotten into some trouble and needed to lay low for a while. Trouble, Mara repeated, her voice shaking. He assaulted me, tried to force himself on me. I defended myself and he ran because he knew what he'd done. And you let everyone think I'd murdered him? You let them hunt me like an animal when you knew he was alive? Kinsley wouldn't meet her eyes. I didn't know what had happened. Thomas said there'd been a misunderstanding with a woman from town. Said he needed to leave until things cooled down. A misunderstanding, Coulter said, his voice like gravel. That's what you're calling assault now? I protected my son. Any father would do the same. Not if they had a shred of decency. Morrison looked like he wanted to spit. You let an innocent woman run for her life. Let her reputation be destroyed. Let the whole territory think she was a murderer. All to protect a coward who couldn't face the consequences of his actions. Watch your tone, Sheriff. Or what? You'll have me fired? Go ahead and try. Morrison turned to John Marsh. You knew about this. The foreman looked miserable. I suspected. When Thomas left that night, he took money from the safe. Not his father's watch. That was still in his room. And his horse came back because he let it go near the river to make it look like something had happened. But I couldn't prove any of it. And Mr. Kinsley, he trailed off. Mr. Kinsley signed your paychecks, Coulter finished. Yes. Mara stood up, her whole body trembling with rage she'd been holding back for months. You let me run. You let me starve and freeze and live in terror. You let people say I was a thief and a murderer, and all along you knew I was innocent. Kinsley finally looked at her, and what she saw in his face wasn't remorse. It was irritation. Like she was an inconvenience he'd hoped would stay buried. I did what I had to do for my family, he said. Your family? Mara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your son is a rapist, you're a liar, and your money doesn't change what either of you are. You have no proof of what Thomas did. I have my word. I have witnesses. And I have the fact that your son ran instead of facing me. She stepped closer, and Kinsley actually backed up. But you know what? I don't need you to admit what he did. I don't need you to apologize. Because everyone in Fort Benton is going to know the truth now. They're going to know Thomas Kinsley is a coward and his father is a liar. And no amount of money is going to change that. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you. She turned to Morrison. Are we done here? Almost. Morrison pulled out a paper. Mr. Kinsley, I'm officially closing the investigation into Thomas Kinsley's disappearance. No crime was committed except the one your son perpetrated against Miss Vale. As for the theft charges, those are dropped effective immediately, seeing as there was no theft. You can't just... I can, and I am. Unless you'd like me to charge Thomas with assault when he eventually comes back, because Miss Vale would be well within her rights to press charges. Kinsley's face went purple. He's not coming back, not while she's here making accusations. Then I guess you'll have to visit him in San Francisco. Morrison tipped his hat. Good day, Mr. Kinsley. Miss Vale, Hayes, let's go. They climbed back into the wagon in silence. Mara felt numb, like her body wasn't quite connected to her brain. As they pulled away from the ranch, she watched it disappear behind them and felt something inside her break loose. She started laughing. It came out harsh and slightly hysterical, but she couldn't stop. 6 months. 6 months of running and hiding and being terrified. And the whole time Thomas Kinsley had been safe in San Francisco while his father let the whole territory believe she was a killer. Mara, Coulter's hand was on her shoulder. Breathe. I'm fine. The laughter turned to tears. He was alive the whole time, Coulter, and they knew. They just didn't care. I know. All of it. The running, the starving, She couldn't finish. The weight of it was crushing, all the fear and pain and humiliation she'd endured for something she hadn't done. Coulter pulled her against him, his arms solid and real. It's over now. You hear me? It's over. But it didn't feel over. It felt raw and open and wrong. Back in Fort Benton, word spread fast. By evening, everyone knew that Thomas Kinsley was alive, that he'd run to avoid facing what he'd done, that his father had knowingly let Mara take the blame. The whispers that had followed her before transformed into something different. Shame, embarrassment, awkward apologies from people who'd been so quick to believe the worst. Clara found Mara outside the boarding house as the sun was setting. I heard what happened, she said quietly, at the ranch, about Thomas. Then you heard I was innocent all along. Yes, and Clara twisted her hands together. I'm sorry. I should have believed you, should have questioned things more. But it was easier to think you'd done something wrong than to think someone like Thomas Kinsley could be a rapist, Mara finished. You can say it. Yes, that. Clara's eyes were wet. I failed you. We all did. And I don't know how to make that right. Mara wanted to be angry, wanted to make Clara feel the full weight of what her cowardice had cost. But looking at the older woman's face, all she felt was tired. You can't make it right, she said. What's done is done. But maybe you can do better next time. Maybe when someone accuses a woman of something, you ask questions before you destroy her life. I will. I promise. Good. Mara turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't hate you, any of you. I'm done with this place, done with the people who only believe in justice when it's convenient. She walked away before Clara could respond, found Coulter waiting by the horses. Ready to go home? He asked. Home. The word settled something in her chest. Yes, let's get out of here. They rode through the night, neither of them wanting to spend another minute in Fort Benton. The moon was bright enough to see by, turning the landscape silver and strange. Mara felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped everything from inside her and left just the shell. You're quiet, Coulter said after a few hours. Thinking. About? About how I thought I'd feel vindicated. Triumphant even, like proving them wrong would somehow make up for everything. She stared at the horizon. But it doesn't, it just makes me sad, and angry, and tired. That's normal. Is it? Because I don't feel normal. I feel... She searched for the word. Empty. Like I spent 6 months running from something that should never have happened, and now that it's over, I don't know what to do with myself. Coulter was quiet for a moment. Then, you grieve. Grieve? For the life you should have had, for the time they took from you, for the person you were before all this. He glanced at her. And then you let it go, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because carrying it around will poison everything you try to build. Did you? Let go of what happened to Sarah? Eventually. Took years. But yeah, I did. Because holding on to the anger and the unfairness was killing me slower than the grief. He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. You don't have to let go today, or tomorrow, but eventually you'll need to, for your own sake. They reached the ranch just before dawn. The sight of it, simple and solid against the lightening sky, made something in Mara's chest ease. This was home now. This was where she belonged. Inside, Coulter built up the fire while Mara made coffee. The routine was comforting, familiar. When they sat down across from each other at the table, the exhaustion of the past 2 days finally caught up with her. I need to sleep, she said. Go. I'll handle the chores today. Coulter? Go, Mara. You've earned the rest. She climbed the stairs to her room but paused at the door. Then, making a decision that felt both terrifying and right, she walked past it to Coulter's room instead. She crawled into his bed, still fully dressed, and buried her face in his pillow that smelled like him, wood smoke and soap and safety. She was asleep before he came upstairs. When she woke, it was late afternoon, and someone was sitting in the chair by the window. Coulter, reading one of Sarah's old books, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "You're still here," Mara said. "Where else would I be?" He set the book down. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by a horse, but better than yesterday." She sat up, pushing hair out of her face. "How long was I asleep?" 10 hours, give or take." "You should have woken me." "Why?" "The ranch didn't burn down. The animals are fed, and you needed the rest." He came over and sat on the edge of the bed. "Besides, I liked watching you sleep. You don't frown when you're sleeping." "I frown?" "Constantly, especially when you're thinking hard about something." He traced the line between her eyebrows. "Right here. You get this little crease." She caught his hand, pressed it against her cheek. "Thank you for everything. For coming with me, for standing beside me, for—" "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do, because you didn't have to do any of it. You could have sent me away that first morning, could have turned me in for the reward, could have stayed neutral when Morrison came asking questions. But you didn't. You chose me, and that means everything." Coulter's eyes were suspiciously bright. "You made it easy to choose. You're—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "You're the best thing that's happened to me in 6 years, Maravale. Maybe longer. And if you'll have me, I'd like to spend whatever time I've got left making sure you know that." "Is this a proposal?" "Not officially. Figure you've been through enough without me adding pressure." He smiled slightly. "But when you're ready, when enough time has passed that you're sure, I'd like to marry you. If you'll have a stubborn old widower with more land than sense." Mara felt tears spill over. "I'll have you. Today, tomorrow, whenever. But yes. My answer is yes." "You're sure?" Because she kissed him to shut him up. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she said, "I've never been more sure of anything. I love you, Coulter Hayes, and I want to build a life here with you, a real life. Not running, not hiding, just living." "Then that's what we'll do." He rested his forehead against hers. "We'll build something good here, something that lasts." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while the afternoon light faded to evening. Outside, the land that had almost killed Mara stretched wild and beautiful. But inside, she'd found something stronger than wilderness. She'd found home. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and planning. Word continued to spread across the territory about what really happened with Thomas Kinsley. Some people apologized. Others just pretended they'd never believed the accusations in the first place. Mara didn't much care either way. She had more important things to focus on, like expanding the ranch, like learning to read the ledgers Coulter kept, like planning where they'd build the new barn come summer. One morning in late May, she was working in the garden Sarah had started years ago, coaxing it back to life after years of neglect, when a rider approached. She tensed automatically, then relaxed when she recognized Peter Marsh, the stable hand who'd spoken up for her. "Miss Vale," he called, dismounting. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. What brings you out here?" "Wanted to give you something." He pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. "It's from Thomas Kinsley. Well, from San Francisco anyway." Mara's stomach clenched. "What?" "Letter came to the ranch addressed to you. Mr. Kinsley was going to burn it, but I took it, figured you deserved to read it, even if what it says is garbage." She took the envelope with shaking hands. Her name was written across the front in unfamiliar handwriting. "Thank you, Peter, for this, and for speaking up when it mattered. Should have done it sooner. I'll regret that for the rest of my life." He tipped his hat. "Take care, Miss Vale. You deserve better than what this place gave you." After he left, Mara stood holding the letter, afraid to open it. Finally, she went inside and found Coulter. "What's that?" he asked. "Letter, from Thomas." She held it out. "I don't know if I want to read it." "Then don't. Burn it. He doesn't deserve your time." "But what if—" "What if nothing? He's a coward who destroyed your life to save his own skin. Whatever he has to say doesn't matter." But Mara's curiosity won out. She opened the envelope and read. The letter was short. Thomas admitted what he'd done, the assault, the running, the cowardice. He claimed he'd been drunk, that he'd made a mistake, that he was sorry. He hoped she could forgive him someday. Mara read it twice, then handed it to Coulter. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think he wants to feel better about himself. Wants your forgiveness so he can stop feeling guilty. Coulter set the letter down. But that's not your responsibility. You don't owe him peace of mind. I know. She stared at the paper. I'm not going to write back. I'm not going to forgive him, not because I'm holding on to anger, but because he doesn't deserve the effort. That's fair. She took the letter to the fireplace and dropped it in. They watched it burn together, the paper curling and blackening until nothing remained but ash. It's done, Mara said softly, all of it. Finally done. Coulter wrapped his arms around her from behind. Now what? Now we live, really live, the way we were meant to all along. And that's exactly what they did. Summer arrived in full force, turning the Montana landscape into something almost unrecognizable from the frozen wasteland Mara had first encountered. The hills rolled green and gold under endless blue skies. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible colors. The creek ran clear and cold, perfect for cooling off after long days of work. Mara stood at the edge of the property one morning in early June, surveying the land that stretched before her. Not Coulter's land anymore. Their land. Or it would be, once the paperwork went through. She'd ridden into Virginia City 2 weeks earlier with Coulter and filed a homestead claim on the adjacent quarter section, 160 acres of raw wilderness that nobody else wanted. The land office clerk had looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Ma'am, that's rough country. Not many women try to prove up a claim on their own. Good thing I'm not on my own then, she'd said, and signed her name with a hand that didn't shake. Now she was staring at her future, trying to imagine what it would look like in 5 years. 10. A lifetime. Planning to stand there all morning? Coulter's voice came from behind her. Because those fence posts aren't going to set themselves. She turned to find him watching her with that expression he got sometimes, part amusement, part something deeper that made her chest warm. Just thinking about where to put things. The cabin should go near that stand of cottonwoods. Good shade in summer, windbreak in winter. Ambitious. Starting with a cabin? Have to live somewhere while we build up the rest. She walked toward him, wiping sweat from her forehead. Besides, it'll give us more space. Your house is fine for 2, but if we're expanding the operation, we'll need room for hired help eventually. Hired help. Listen to you sounding like a real rancher. I am a real rancher. She poked him in the chest. Or I will be. 5 years of improvements, and the land's mine free and clear. That's the deal. That's the deal, he agreed. Though I'm still not sure why you didn't just marry me first and skip the whole homestead process. Would have been easier. Easier isn't always better. I want this land in my name. Want to know I built something myself, not just inherited it through marriage. She softened. No offense. None taken. I like that you're stubborn about it. He kissed her forehead. Sarah would have liked you. It was the highest compliment he could give, and they both knew it. Mara leaned into him for a moment, breathing in the smell of horse and leather and the sage that grew wild on the hills. Come on, she said finally. Those fences won't build themselves. They spent the next week working from sunup to sundown, clearing brush and digging post holes in ground that fought back with every strike of the shovel. Mara's hands blistered, then calloused over the blisters. Her back ached constantly, but every fence post they set felt like a declaration. This is ours. This is real. This is forever. One evening, sitting by the fire with muscles too tired to move, Coulter pulled out a small wooden box. What's that? Mara asked. Something I've been waiting for the right time to give you. He opened it to reveal a silver ring, simple and worn smooth with age. It was my mother's. Sarah wore it for 12 years, and if you'll have it, I'd like you to wear it now. Mara's throat tightened. Coulter? I know we talked about waiting, about you being sure, but I'm tired of waiting. I want to marry you, Mara Vale. Want to stand up in front of whatever neighbors we can round up and make it official. Want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours, and that's how it's going to be until one of us dies. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, she said, laughing through sudden tears. I'm serious. I know. That's what makes it romantic. She held out her hand. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. End of summer, he said. After the harvest, we'll have a real ceremony. Invite people. Do it right. Just not anyone from Fort Benton. Especially not anyone from Fort Benton. He pulled her into his lap. Just the people who matter, the ones who stood by you when it counted. They married on a Saturday in late August under the cottonwood trees on Mara's new property. Peter Marsh came, along with his brother John, who'd finally quit working for the Kinsleys. The storekeeper from Virginia City attended with his wife, a few neighboring ranchers who'd heard Mara's story and respected what she'd survived. Even Sheriff Morrison showed up, looking uncomfortable in clean clothes, but genuine in his congratulations. Mara wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself, pale blue cotton that Sarah would have approved of. Coulter wore his best shirt and actually combed his hair. They spoke their vows in front of 15 people, promising to love and protect each other for as long as they both lived. When Coulter kissed her, the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. Mara felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were happy tears. Healing tears. The celebration afterward was simple. Food, music from a fiddle player someone had brought, dancing under the stars. Mara found herself pulled into conversation after conversation, people treating her like she belonged, like she'd always been one of them. At one point, she stepped away from the crowd to catch her breath. Peter found her standing alone, looking out at the dark hills. "Overwhelming?" he asked. "In the best way?" She smiled at him. "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy after everything with the Kinsleys. They fired me when I testified. Figured I had nothing left to lose by showing up." He shrugged. "Besides, seeing you happy feels like making up for some of what I didn't do before." "You did enough when it mattered. That's what counts." "Maybe." He shifted his weight. "I heard you're looking for ranch hands, for next spring when you start building up the herd." "We are." "Why? You interested?" "If you'll have me. I'm good with horses. Hard worker. And I owe you." "You don't owe me anything, Peter, but if you want the job, it's yours. Fair wages, honest work. That's all I can promise." "That's more than most folks offer." He held out his hand. "Deal." She shook it, feeling like another piece of the future was falling into place. Coulter found her as the party was winding down. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Hayes?" The name sent warmth through her entire body. "Yes, let's go home." They rode back to Coulter's house, their house now, in comfortable silence. Inside, the fire was already burning, courtesy of someone who'd left early to prepare things. The bedroom had been cleaned, fresh sheets on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the nightstand. Mara stood in the doorway, suddenly nervous. "You all right?" Coulter asked. "Just thinking about how different this is from what I imagined my wedding night would be like. When I was younger, I thought—" She trailed off. "Thought what?" "Thought it would be in some city back east. Thought I'd marry someone conventional, safe, boring probably." She turned to him. "I'm glad I was wrong." "Me too." He closed the distance between them. "You sure about this? About me? Because I'm 42 years old, set in my ways, and I snore. I know, I can hear you through the walls." She touched his face. "And yes, I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything." What happened next was tender and awkward and perfect in its imperfection. Two people learning each other, building something new from the ruins of what they'd lost. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Mara felt a peace she'd never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." Coulter's arms tightened around her. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this." "I won't. I couldn't." She pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Fall arrived with its usual dramatic flair, leaves turning gold and red, the air taking on a crisp edge that promised winter wasn't far behind. Mara and Coulter worked frantically to prepare both properties for the cold months ahead. They stockpiled firewood, repaired buildings, moved livestock to winter pastures. On Mara's land, they'd managed to build a small cabin, one room, basic but solid, with a good fireplace and a roof that didn't leak. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Sometimes she'd ride over there alone just to sit inside and feel the weight of ownership, of belonging somewhere. One October afternoon, she was doing exactly that when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. Her hand went automatically to the revolver at her hip, a reflex now, ingrained by months of practice. But when the riders came into view, she relaxed. It was a family. Man, woman, 3 children, all looking exhausted and road-worn, the kind of desperate she recognized from experience. She stepped outside. "Can I help you?" The man dismounted slowly, like every movement hurt. "Sorry to intrude, ma'am. We're heading west to Oregon. Heard there might be work along the way. Someone in Virginia City said there was a ranch out here that might have something." Mara studied them. The woman was pale, clearly pregnant. The children were thin, their clothes patched and repatched. The horses looked like they might collapse any moment. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Anything. I can farm, ranch, build. My wife can cook, clean, mend. We don't need much, just enough to get us through winter and on to Oregon come spring." Something in Mara recognized something in them. That edge of survival desperation. That willingness to work for scraps just to keep going one more day. "Wait here," she said. She rode back to the main ranch and found Coulter fixing a saddle in the barn. "There's a family at my cabin, looking for work." He looked up. "What kind of family?" "The kind that needs help. Man, wife, 3 kids, pregnant, about 2 steps from falling apart." She paused. "I want to hire them." "We don't need—" "I know, but they do. And someone gave me a chance when I needed it. Seems like the right thing to pass it along." Coulter was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "You're going soft." "I'm being practical. We'll need help come spring anyway. Might as well have them settled in before winter." She crossed her arms. "Unless you think it's a bad idea?" "I think it's exactly the kind of idea Sarah would have had, which means it's a good one." He set down the saddle. "Let's go talk to them." By nightfall, the family, the Johnsons, were settled into Mara's cabin with promises of work, fair wages, and a chance to prove themselves. The gratitude in their eyes was almost painful to see. "Why are you doing this?" Mrs. Johnson asked quietly while the men were outside tending to horses. "Because someone did it for me once, when I had nothing and nowhere to go." Mara handed her a blanket. "Pay it forward when you can. That's all I ask." Over the following months, the Johnsons proved their worth a dozen times over. Mr. Johnson was skilled with carpentry and helped build a proper barn on Mara's property. Mrs. Johnson, despite being heavily pregnant, kept both households running smoothly with her cooking and organization. The children helped with chores and brought an energy to the ranch that had been missing. When Mrs. Johnson went into labor in January, Mara helped deliver the baby, a healthy girl they named Hope. Holding that tiny life in her hands, Mara felt something shift inside her. This was what building a legacy meant. Not just land and livestock, people, community, second chances. By spring, word had spread. The Hayes Ranch, because that's what people called both properties now, regardless of whose name was on which deed, became known as a place where people down on their luck could find honest work and fair treatment. Not charity. Opportunity. Mara was mucking out stalls one April morning when a young woman appeared at the barn entrance, looking terrified and determined in equal measure. "Are you Mara Hayes?" she asked. "I am. Who's asking?" "My name's Rebecca. I heard you help women who are in trouble. Women who've been—" She couldn't finish. Mara set down her shovel, understanding immediately. "Come inside. Let's talk." Over coffee, Rebecca told her story, eerily similar to Mara's own. A man with power had hurt her. She'd fought back. Now she was running. "I don't know what to do," Rebecca whispered. "I don't know where to go." Mara reached across the table and took her hand. "You stay here. You work. You learn to be strong enough that you never have to run again. And when you're ready, you decide what comes next." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Mara smiled. "I know what it's like to have nowhere to go, to think the whole world's against you. But it's not. There are good people out here. You just have to find them." Rebecca stayed. And after her came others. Women fleeing bad situations, families displaced by failed crops, young men looking for honest work instead of trouble. The Hayes Ranch grew from a 2-person operation to a small community, bound together by the understanding that everyone deserved a second chance. 3 years after Mara first hid behind Coulter's barn, she stood on a hill overlooking both properties and marveled at what they'd built. 2 barns, 3 cabins, corrals full of horses and cattle, gardens that produced enough to feed everyone and sell the surplus. People working together, building lives they could be proud of. Coulter rode up beside her, his horse snorting in the cool evening air. "Quite a view," he said. "It is." She leaned into him. "You ever think about how different things could have been if you'd turned me in that first day?" "Sometimes, usually followed by thanking whatever luck or fate or randomness brought you to my barn instead of someone else's." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You changed everything. You know that? Not just for me, for all of them." He gestured toward the ranch below where people were finishing the day's work. Rebecca was teaching one of the Johnson children to read. Peter was working with a new horse. The Johnson's daughter Hope was chasing chickens with the single-minded determination of a 3-year-old. "We changed it together," Mara corrected. "I just followed your example. My example was being a bitter hermit until you forced me to care about something again." She laughed. "Fair point." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. After a while, Mara said, "I'm pregnant." Coulter went very still. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 3 months. Near as I can figure." She turned to face him. "I wasn't sure when to tell you. Wanted to be certain before I said anything." His face cycled through shock, joy, fear, and finally settled on something like wonder. "A baby. We're having a baby." "We are. Probably around October." She searched his expression. "Are you happy?" "I know we didn't plan—" He kissed her, cutting off the words. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "I'm terrified, and thrilled, and grateful, all at the same time. That's exactly how I feel. Sarah and I tried for years. It never happened. I thought maybe I couldn't—" His voice broke. "I thought that chance was gone." It wasn't gone, just waiting. Mara pressed his hand to her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a family, Coulter. A real family." That night, lying in bed, they talked about names and futures and all the things they wanted for this child they'd created. They talked about expanding the house, about teaching their son or daughter to ride and shoot and read, about building something that would outlast them both. "What do you think they'll remember about us?" Mara asked. "When they're grown, what will they say about their parents?" Coulter considered. "I think they'll say their mother was the bravest person they ever knew, that she survived things that would have broken most people and came out stronger, that she built a community out of nothing and gave people hope when they had none." "And their father?" "Their father was smart enough to help when it mattered and stay out of the way when it didn't." He kissed her temple. "And loved their mother more than anything in the world." The baby, a boy they named Samuel, arrived in late October during an early snowstorm. Mara labored for 18 hours, attended by Mrs. Johnson and Rebecca, with Coulter pacing holes in the floor downstairs. When Samuel finally emerged, red-faced and screaming, Mara felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. "He's perfect," she whispered, counting fingers and toes. "He looks like an angry potato," Coulter said, but his voice was thick with emotion. "Our angry potato." She looked up at him. "We made this perfect, impossible thing." Samuel grew fast, surrounded by a community that treated him like he belonged to everyone. He learned to walk holding Rebecca's hands, learned to ride sitting in front of Peter on the gentlest mare, learned the names of wildflowers from Mrs. Johnson and how to track animals from his father. And from Mara, he learned that strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing what needed doing anyway. By the time Samuel was 5, the Hayes Ranch had become legendary in the territory. Not for its size or wealth, but for its heart. People would travel miles just to see the place where broken people went to become whole again. One summer evening, sitting on the porch while Samuel played in the yard, a rider approached. Mara tensed automatically, then relaxed when she recognized Sheriff Morrison. He was older now, grayer, but still carried himself with that same weathered authority. "Sheriff," she greeted him, "what brings you out this way?" "Official business, actually." He dismounted, tipping his hat. "Though not the kind you're probably worried about." "What kind, then?" "The territorial governor's been hearing stories about this place, about what you and Coulter have built. He's impressed." Morrison pulled out a letter. "He's offering you a position, advocate for women's rights in the territory, helping other women who find themselves in situations like you were in." Mara took the letter, stunned. "He wants me to work for the government?" He wants you to keep doing what you're already doing, just with official backing, resources, legal authority to actually change things. Morrison smiled. It's a paid position, respected one. You'd be the first woman to hold it. She read the letter twice, her mind racing. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Territory's changing, Mara, getting more civilized, more lawful, but we need people who remember what it was like before, people who will fight for those who can't fight for themselves. After Morrison left, Mara showed the letter to Coulter. What do you think? She asked. I think you should do it. Just like that? Just like that. You've already been doing this work for years. Might as well get paid for it and have the law backing you. He pulled her close. Besides, Samuel should see his mother changing the world. Give him something to live up to. Mara took the position. Over the next decade, she became one of the most influential voices in Montana Territory, advocating for women's property rights, legal protections against assault, and fair treatment under the law. She traveled extensively, spoke at town halls and territorial meetings, wrote letters that changed legislation. But she always came home to the ranch, to Coulter, who grew old gracefully beside her, to Samuel, who grew into a young man with his father's steadiness and his mother's fierce heart, to the community they'd built, which continued to grow and thrive. One evening, 20 years after she'd first hidden behind Coulter's barn, Mara stood in the same spot and looked at what had become of that desperate night. The ranch now employed 30 people, had helped hundreds more get their start in life, had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose compassion over judgment. Samuel rode up beside her, 19 now, tall and capable, preparing to file his own homestead claim on adjacent land. Thinking about the old days? He asked. Always. She smiled at him. Your father and I built something good here. I want you to remember that. Not the money, or the land, or any of it. Just that we built something good. And you can too. I know, Ma. You've told me 1,000 times. Then I'll tell you 1,000 more. She reached over and squeezed his hand. The world's not always fair, Samuel. It's not always kind. But you can choose to be better than what it gives you. You can choose to help instead of hurt, to build instead of destroy. Like you did. Like we all did. Me, your father, Peter, Rebecca, everyone who came here looking for second chances. She looked out at the land she loved. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not acres or cattle, just the knowledge that when people needed help, we gave it. And that made all the difference. Coulter found them as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He was grayer now, moved a bit slower, but his eyes still held that same warmth they'd had the first time he'd looked at her, and decided she was worth saving. Dinner's ready, he said. Rebecca made that stew you like. Coming? Mara kissed Samuel's cheek. Go on ahead. We'll be right there. After Samuel left, Coulter took her hand. You all right? He asked. Better than all right. Just feeling grateful. She leaned into him. For you. For this life. For everything we built together. We did all right, didn't we? We did better than all right. We did extraordinary. She turned to face him fully. I love you, Coulter Hayes. Have from almost the first moment, even when I was too scared to admit it. I love you too, Mara Hayes. Will until the day I die, and probably after, if there's anything beyond. They walked back to the house together, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. Inside, their family waited, blood and chosen both, bound together by something stronger than law or obligation. That night, after everyone had eaten and dispersed to their own homes, Mara stood on the porch one last time. The stars were out in full force, brilliant and countless. Somewhere out there, other women were running. Other people were desperate and afraid and convinced the world had given up on them. But they were wrong. Because places like this existed. People like Coulter existed. And tomorrow, Mara would wake up and keep fighting for those people. Keep building this impossible, beautiful thing they'd created from nothing but stubbornness and hope. The frontier had tried to break her, had hunted her, starved her, nearly killed her a dozen different ways. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd thrived. Had taken the worst the world could offer and transformed it into something good. And that, she thought, as she went inside to her husband and her life and her hard-won peace, was the only revenge that mattered. Not destroying those who'd hurt her, just living well, living fully, living free. The door closed behind her, shutting out the cold and the dark. Inside, firelight danced on familiar walls. Coulter was reading by the fire, glasses perched on his nose, looking up as she entered with a smile that said, "Welcome home." She'd run a long way to find this, had suffered more than any person should have to suffer. But every step, every hardship, every moment of terror had led her here. To home, to family, to love that lasted. And standing there in the doorway between the wild frontier night and the warm civilization she'd built with her own two hands, Mara understood something fundamental about the human spirit. It could be bent, it could be tested, it could even be broken for a time, but it could also heal, could grow stronger in the broken places, could build something beautiful from the ruins of what had been destroyed. That was the real story, not the running or the fear or the injustice, but what came after. What she'd chosen to do with the second chance Coulter had given her that frozen morning behind the barn. She'd chosen to live, to love, to build, to help others the way she'd been helped. And in the end, that choice made all the difference.